in the past, I kind of started reaching out to people when issues like that happened. Like just saying, hey, is there something you're not understanding? Is there a way that I could help you kind of figure out what's going on?
Hello friends, welcome back to another video. So, as a raider or Ryoko yourself, right? How do you, when you talk about like the fundamentals of what it takes to be a raider, how do you take those things and practice them? Because we talked about the whole idea of having different third-party tools.
I use them in a very minimal sense. So
Okay.
like during raid, I'm not running any of them. And this is because a lot of people in my group do run them, so I can see what I'm doing without them.
Right.
But let's say I'm preparing for raid. Good example, this tier, I decided to play Gunbreaker. It's a class I'm not very familiar with. I needed to learn the rotation, etc.
Right.
So I ran ACT just hitting a target dummy and recording my logs to see how I was doing with my rotation in a vacuum.
Okay.
Which essentially just helped me get an understanding of what my rotation was, how I should do it, what my cooldown timings were, making sure that I'm optimizing in that sense. Obviously, when you get into raid, hitting a target dummy isn't as helpful because there are things that exist like downtime, periods where you can't hit the boss, etc. That may get in the way of those things. So in that sense, I use them very limitedly outside of raid, and then just review my logs from other people in my group.
Okay.
In terms of preparing, though, it's really just understanding the mechanics of fights. My group does not go in blind when we're doing encounters, and because of that, I typically will find resources, whether that be raid plans or YouTube videos that exist, or maybe friends that are raiders as well also hand me materials that I can utilize to study. I'm not sure that everybody will have access to those things immediately. You need to know where to look for them, but YouTube's usually the best bet where you can find videos, etc.
Okay, so how do you feel about, since your group doesn't do things blind, how do you feel about people that do like progression parties or I think prog parties blind? Like, they don't want to see anything before the fight, they don't want to know mechanics, story, nothing. They just want to crunch the numbers on their own and try to figure things out like day one almost.
I mean, more power to them. I mean, I've done a few fights blind, mainly just extremes. They can be fun. I feel like when you get into savage encounters, though, it's really more of a test of your patience, if you want to be blind or not. You're, in any group setting, you're kind of at a limit of your worst player. I know that sounds harsh, but if somebody is taking time to figure something out and they're taking 10 times as long, then everybody else in the group will have to understand that expectation, and that can come up a lot more in a blind progression environment, at least in my opinion. Because that can still happen even in a not blind environment.
Okay, so when you say like worst player, is Final Fantasy, like at least the rating scene of it? Because I know for casual content, let's say one of us doesn't know the game as well, or we don't know the class as well, it can really hinder like the enjoyment, I'd say, for most players running that content. So in the raid space, like, is one of your team members not being up to par? How detrimental is that? Do you kick people? Do you work with them? How's the patience factor?
I feel like there's a lot of up in the air aspects of that question.
Right.
It's really just context. Context is key here. I think a really good example is that somebody may be trying their hardest. They may be putting in a lot of time to figure things out, but they're just not grasping it, and they're taking a while. It's really difficult to try to say, I want to remove this player because they're taking longer, but they're putting in way more effort than everybody else. On the flip side of that, if you have a player that's failing at every mechanic and not trying to better themselves in any way and have a poor mindset, then those are the players that you would want to kick very quickly.
So kicking players is like an expected thing in the raid space? Like, has there ever been a time where you just run with the people you have to the end, regardless of how challenging it might be?
I would definitely want to say that it's expected. It's one thing to want to, and it's another thing to do. There's a lot of instances in my raid leading career where I've chose not to kick a player even though they're consistently a problem, just because of the fact it could damage the entire group's morale.
Alright.
And the problems in the grand scheme are very minuscule.
Okay, so how often are you typically raid leader in things?
I led a raid group from Shadowbringers, the second tier of Shadowbringers, up until the first tier of the current expansion, which was M1 through M4S.
Okay. And would you say, like, running the group itself is difficult for you, or is it just more about making the hard decisions, like removing people, or saying we need to pull someone on for support for a night, maybe? That sort of thing?
I don't necessarily think there's a lot of hard decisions. Granted, it really just goes back to context, right? I had a co-lead that I ran my static with. And obviously we didn't always see eye to eye, but we came pretty close on agreeing with quite a lot of issues that were happening in our raid group.
Okay.
But the biggest issues that we typically ran into were more people not doing their homework, people not coming to raid prepared, lack of communication if they're going to be absent or late. I think these are things that pretty much every raid group is going to have to deal with.
Okay.
And it's really just how long do you want to deal with it.
And you say homework and being prepared. So what is, as like the raid group, what is expected of each member when they're like doing these? Because it's just turn on the game for most people, right? Like,
it really depends on what level of raid group you're trying to envision yourself as. If you're a more casual group, there might not be any real expectations. You might just be coming to raid with your friends. In a mid-core setting, which is kind of the environment that I've leaned into, maybe more on the hardcore end of mid-core, but not quite hardcore. There's an expectation that you need to come to raid, and let's say we're progging Lights Rampant and E8S. The expectation is that you would have watched some videos or maybe read some guides, even if it was only for a few minutes just to familiarize yourself with the mechanic. Nobody's asking you to come in and execute the mechanic perfectly, obviously. That's what progression rating is. You kind of have to beat your head against the wall until you get it. But if you haven't done any type of prep work in that regard, to come to raid and be like, hey, I have an idea of how this mechanic works. I don't think I'll execute it properly the first time, but at least I've looked at it, right?
okay.
Those are kind of the expectations, at least that I have as a raid leader. When I say, hey guys, tomorrow we're going to be on this mechanic, let's try to look up some information for it.
What if I'm like a really hands-on player though? Like me looking at something doesn't actually help me grasp any of it, and I consider it a waste of time, like, does that now put me in a place where you might not want me in the group, or how do you feel about that? Like, that response? I'm sure you get some.
I mean, I've definitely gotten that response, and even though I've gotten that response, I've had plenty of people in my raid group say, well, I'm more of a hands-on player, but I did look at the guide at least, just to have an idea. Because for a lot of those hands-on players, it's not necessarily that they can't learn from a guide. They obviously do learn better by executing the mechanic themselves. But if you've looked at something for a few minutes and you just understand the positioning that may be on a picture that's on a guide, once you see the mechanic, it may click that, oh, well, this is why they do it that way in the picture. So you're able to get that additional perspective that may help you understand things faster.
Alright. Okay. So, just real quick, on a side note, like, what is your favorite fight in the game, and why do you consider your favorite fight?
I feel like that's kind of a tough one.
Yeah, because you've experienced a lot of the Savage Core stuff, right? Well, I guess the better way to put it is, like, do you have a casual fight that's your favorite, and then a hardcore fight that's your favorite, or does it overlap in the way of, like, this is your favorite in both environments?
Well, I guess, for me, casual would be like an extreme raid, right? Or an extreme encounter. I think this expansion probably had one of my favorite extremes. That and Shadowbringers for more of a casual sense.
Okay.
I really loved the Valley Garmonda fight in Dawn Trail.
Okay.
The very thematic Tank Buster had me super hyped up the first time I saw it, and I love seeing it every single time. And then Seed of Sacrifice, because the music slaps.
Yeah,
and
it's a really good one.
And the mechanics just feel complicated enough that it's confusing, but rewarding enough when you execute them that the fight feels good. In terms of Savage fights, though, I think Shiva, the reimagined Shiva fight in E8S, is probably my favorite fight.
I thought
it's the one that I spent. Oh, it's not that they hated it. They hated the fact that the hardest mechanic of the fight was 2 minutes into it.
Ah.
There's a lot of controversy around Lights Rampant and the strat that was used for months and months of the raid tier that was honestly pretty poor for things like melee uptime. There was a lot of movement that needed to happen, and it did not feel good as a samurai back then, which is what I was playing. Having to disconnect from the boss for such long periods of time, at least personally.
And then there's like big cutscenes, right?
I feel like cutscenes are kind of, for me, they never bothered me so much. For others, I understand their perspective. The Shiva cutscene was long enough that I needed to go grab some water. I could. It was a nice kind of little reset. I got to breathe for a minute. I'm the type of player that I focus very intensely when I'm raiding. I don't like to talk a lot when I'm raiding. So those little break periods are kind of nice. It lets me breathe.
Gotcha. Okay, so the controversy was around that mechanic, and outside of that, and I guess the issues you were having as a melee, you would say, for the most part, the fight was really enjoyable.
I would say so. The mechanics were challenging enough that it felt impactful, but the overall aesthetic and kind of thematics of the fight really felt really impactful throughout the entire time. Granted, if I have actually had done DSR, I probably would say that's my favorite fight. But I've only watched the videos, so I
And
want to know.
what's DSR?
DSR is Dragon Song Reprise, the ultimate that is themed after the Heaven's Ward main scenario.
Ah, so ultimates are kind of like a tier above Savage, or is that just something you hadn't done yet?
Ultimates are definitely a tier above Savage. They're usually relatively long fights with complicated mechanics. I think Fru or future rewritten Ultimate, or the Eden Ultimate, was roughly a 19-minute fight.
Oh,
so it's
okay.
pretty long encounter.
And average fights are what, around 10 minutes maybe?
Most of the 1, 2, 3 turns of each tier are about 8 to 10 minutes. And then the last fight of a tier is usually about 12 to 14, at least early on.
Okay, so would you say if Ultimate is like the big end game for people, me being that new player, if I clear an Ultimate, do I now get to like boast that I'm better than most of the community? You know, something like that.
Yes and no. The big trophy for these is the big shiny weapons that everybody's bound to have seen, especially you as a new player. If you're coming in, you're going to see these shiny, glowy weapons that look epic, and you're going to be like, how do I get them? And right. Ultimate is the answer. But Ultimates also have, some of them have gotten easier over time, like Uwu, or the Ultimate Weapon Refrain, is considered an easier Ultimate. I have completed that one, and I would honestly say that it's even easier than some of the more recent Savage fights.
Really? Is that because of like the gear progression in the game, or like things start falling off in difficulty over time? Are players just getting better now?
I think this one's largely due to class balancing and the stat squish that happened a few years ago. As the expansions have gotten up in level, they've had to tone down the stat scaling, so that way we're not doing millions of damage, which has resulted in older fights becoming easier because of how those numbers have been affected.
So I know there's a thing now, I forget the name of it, but there's a thing now where like sometimes they'll revive older fights so that you can kind of play it back when it was imagined the first time. It was added to the game the first time. Do you think that like makes any sense, or do you think like it's a waste of resources to do that when they can just go back and buff older fights instead?
Well, I think what you're talking about is them going back and just raising old fights to the current level, and that's referred to as Fox Hollows, which is where the Unreal difficulty is, where they'll take old fights and they'll just up the level cap to current. I've done a few Unreals, and I wouldn't say they're any harder than their originals. I've heard some even argue that they're a little bit easier, and I'm not sure what the reasoning is there, but it's not a content that I've necessarily dipped my toes in too much.
Okay, because I guess the thing, well, what I'm thinking about is if I'm in an Unreal, why won't they just, I guess, try to take that same concept back and update the old fight and let that be its permanent state versus a rotation of Unreal fights coming in and out of play?
I think it's more just the unfortunate aspect, and I think a lot of people will say this, and you'll probably hear it multiple times, is Square Enix is a small indie company. They're not really, but it sometimes feels like they are with how they put out content, right? And there's nothing against Yoshi P and the devs, but it seems like they've not really been afforded the opportunity to up their staff, maybe. And this could just be personal opinion, but you hear it fairly often. They're probably just focusing their resources on other things, and I think that putting a lot of resources in these older encounters that people may not necessarily be interested in is maybe just why they don't do it more often.
Okay, that makes sense. So, back to the ultimates and the topic of raiding and like how I would prepare myself to be a high level raider. So, I hear a lot of different opinions, but I know there are people that like call out of work, there are people that have like snacks by them all day long, or they pre-order meals. And so like when it comes to the intensity of what it means to go clear content week 1, day 1, the first month, like how much preparation is typically expected of the average raider, and why do I want to do all these things when I could just play a different game or play this later on when the content's kind of like died down some or my gear's higher? Why do it then?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to week 1 or day 1 prog. Obviously, I've raided week 1 in Savage, but I haven't completed a week 1, which is another level of dedication that a lot of people will take, because back to your earlier question of blind progression, there's no strats that exist week 1. Everybody's figuring things out as they go. And the amount of hours needed for, let's say, the week 1 groups that are joining into the world race, they were pulling 10 to 12 hour raid days every day for the first week. It's kind of a level of dedication that you need, and it's probably more of a mental thing. I've definitely had longer raid days where I've raided upwards of 8 hours. And I think that I could probably pull off raiding the times that a week 1 group would. But it's all, I think it's just all a mental thing. But to your point of taking off work, I mean, that's why. They're taking off work because they're spending that long every day raiding the first week. In my group, I obviously worked the first week. My group went 4 hours the first few nights, and that was pretty much it.
Okay, so you do like every day you jump into a raid, or how does your group structure it? What's the expectation for me as a member? Do I have to be there twice a week? Do I need to be there like all week?
Every group's a little different. Some groups might go 2 days. Some groups might go 3. My current raid group went 5. And that may seem like a bit, but we had somebody who was consistently, unfortunately, late every day, and it kind of ate into our raid times. So we raided about 10 to 12 hours the first week, which is the equivalent of almost a group raiding 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
So every group situation's a little different. My old raid group that I had led for X number of years raided 3 days a week.
Okay. So do you ever feel like annoyed having to go? Because I feel like a lot of friends that I might encounter in the game, you ask them to do something and they say, I got raided, but it's always like a dreaded statement. So like, is raiding that frequently ever like draining to you as a player, or do you really enjoy the content so much that like you just wouldn't care? You always want to do it.
I hate to keep saying context is key, but
I mean,
it really just depends on. It really just depends on what's going on in your group. You know, I think a really good example is I've unfortunately been a little upset about how often some people are late in my raid group, and it makes me a bit frustrated. So when it's raid time, it's, oh boy, who's gonna be late this week? Which is a unfortunate thing, but the group performs really well, so it's something I'm willing to put up with. But I've definitely been in situations in the past where I've led a raid group and we've been stuck on a mechanic for ages, and people aren't coming to raid prepared, they're not respecting everybody else's time, and I'm kind of just in that I don't want to go to raid right now, but if the raid leader doesn't show up, then that looks real bad.
That's fair. That's fair. So you run into that issue of people just not getting mechanics, because I've seen it to where you have like a free company or a raid group constantly going to a fight. It's been like 3 weeks straight, and there's just something that's still killing all of them. So at that point, context is key and everything. Is that the point of where the raid leader has to now start thinking about, do I cut the branch that isn't working, or do I need to reapproach this fight with a different strategy or perspective? How do you handle that issue?
In the past, I kind of started reaching out to people when issues like that happened. Just saying, hey, is there something you're not understanding? Is there a way that I could help you kind of figure out what's going on? But it's really a touchy subject in the rating space. Unfortunately, a lot of people may not be willing to take criticism, which is something you kind of have to dance around. If you kind of have somebody that's not willing to take criticism, then you have to wonder, should they be in your raid group? And to your point of snipping the branch that's causing issues, there has been times where I've made the decision to remove people because they refused to try to understand that they were having an issue. Me and my co-leader tried multiple times to help reach out to them and try to make sure that, do you have the proper resources? Is there something you're not getting that maybe we could help explain? Those are unfortunately things that are probably going to happen a lot, and I think figuring out how to deal with them is just part of being a raid leader.
Okay, so one thing that floats around the casual space a lot is we'll often hear things like, you might have a high-level player or a raid tier level player join a learning party or join an instance or a group to kind of not necessarily interview or vet people, but to just kind of pick out people who they find potential in to join their groups or not. Somebody that's new, but they feel like they'd be able to coach or teach to be a high performer, right? So do you ever end up doing things like that when you're searching for people to join your group? Do you find casuals or coach inexperienced players and think to yourself, I can teach this person, or no, they're a little too under level for me at the moment? How do you think about those things?
In the past, I'm going to bring up some third-party tools here. Typically, when I recruited, I didn't go into those spaces, trying to go join a learning party or a blind party. We would typically make some type of Reddit post on the 14 recruitment forum or in the 14 recruitment Discord, which are great tools if you're looking for a static or you need to find players for a static. But typically what we would do is we would ask them to provide some logs if they had any, which would kind of let us see what their performance is like. Do they have an idea of what their rotation is? Even if they're not necessarily performing well, maybe we'll bring them into trial and we'll try to get a grasp for what their mindset is. Do they have a mindset that is good for a progression environment, or do they have a mindset that's good for trying to improve? Are they able to take criticism? I feel like as long as you have some good qualities, it doesn't matter how new of a player you are. And granted, this is also context because it really depends on your raid group situation, where your raid group is as a whole. Are you willing to take a newer player and help them coach or help coach them through? I've taken a few bets on people, and I felt like some of those people had really good potential. Granted, everybody to a degree has some type of shortcoming, and whether they can move past that or not is another topic for discussion.
Okay.
But I'm all for trying to give people a chance, even if they're not some top performing player, and kind of help them through. I think a really good example is a few raid tiers ago, I brought in a warrior who on paper didn't really look that great, but I liked his attitude, and I was upfront and blunt with him that I'd provide him some criticism, and as long as he tried to improve, we're A-okay, and he did just that. Granted, there were some other issues with that player, but he did improve pretty considerably in the time that he raided with us.
Okay. So has there ever been a time where, like, you were coaching a player or you were trying to encourage a player to do some harder content, and then you saw, like, a mechanic in a different part of the fight, or maybe later in, like, a dungeon or something, and you thought to yourself, like, yeah, I have no idea how I was going to help this person through this, or if I can?
I mean, I definitely have. I know that's not a great thing, but there's been some people that I've raided with where I'm just like, how? I don't want to sound mean. I'm sure everybody's had some type of experience where they're just confused to how this person's even here. But I think that's just, you're going to run into that, and the best thing to do is just to try to be helpful as you can be, and if nothing comes from it, then I think it's just time to move on.
So what kind of mechanic makes you have that thought? Because I'd assume it's probably something like very obvious, like maybe there's a person that plays with controller and, they tend to have some drifting issues, and now a mechanic pops up and it's about teleporting somewhere in a very precise moment. Or like, are there things obvious like that, or is it more about like, okay, I know how this person tends to handle this style of mechanic and they usually struggle with it, but now there's like too many layers on that mechanic?
I think it's more the latter. Ironically, one of the best players that I know plays on controller. So I really don't think that that's a proper handicap to give somebody that they're playing on controller when I've seen what some players can do with it. It's more just, once you've raided with somebody for a while, you can kind of get an idea of how they process things, how they handle certain mechanics. And I don't think I necessarily have a specific example, but you'll be like, yeah, Sally over here, she's going to struggle with this mechanic. And it's just one of those things that you kind of realize. I think my co-leader is a really good, my ex-co-leader of my raid group was a really good example of this. There's a lot of mechanics that she could figure out very quickly, and then there were a few mechanics where she was just like, I don't get it. She would rely on a call-out, which is perfectly fine. A lot of people may tell you that you shouldn't rely on a call-out, but if you're struggling with a mechanic and you've tried to figure it out and you just can't, and there's a good call-out for you to follow that lets you get to where you need to be, don't think of that as a crutch, because there's probably a mechanic that you're going to understand that person giving you a call-out doesn't. Okay,
so are call-outs like a temporary thing? Like, if I am raiding with someone and I rely on a call-out to do this mechanic flawlessly, and like, is there ever a point where now it's like, okay, we don't do call-outs anymore, everybody needs to be locked in and like get it done?
It really depends on your group. My current group still calls things out that doesn't really need to be called out, but it's just become a norm. There might be somebody that relies on it, and the second you don't call it out, maybe they mess up. There's always going to be a few mechanics that are really just good to call out in general. People may be focused on their rotations. It might be the 2-minute window where people are really focused on their burst. So having some people that can continue those callouts, usually one dedicated person for those, is great. So that way people aren't talking over each other. But for the most part, I would encourage people to have major callouts. But there's going to be a lot of callouts that you can trim eventually. And you may only end up having like 5 callouts in a 15-minute fight by the end of it.
Okay.
Just whatever works for your group.
Sense. And I ask because with my personal experience with raiding, or just any mechanical fight in the game. I feel like I'm very good at taking orders for things. So like if someone is telling me I need to be at point A and then I need to be at point B when this thing pops off, I'm very good at doing that, but when it comes to like understanding the mechanic itself, if I needed to do it on my own without a callout, I feel like there's a major delay for that. So I can do it flawlessly with the callout, and then maybe like a week later I actually understood what I was doing. Do you feel like players like that need to lock in more to like the understanding piece, or maybe they need to not have the callout so that they can actually train their brain to pick up on things faster on their own?
I think this goes back to preparing, the preparing question you had. If you know you're a player that can do the callout or do the mechanic without a callout, then maybe you just need to go look at the video and try to understand what's happening in the mechanic, or maybe you could record a POV to also use as a tool. I streamed all of my raid prog this tier, so if there was something I didn't understand, I could look at my own perspective of what was happening, rather than just trying to go find a random video on the internet of the of M5S that may have had a perspective that I needed when all I needed was my own.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
So it's really just about using those tools, or even just asking a question. Like, you're struggling with this, well, go ask Jimmy. Jimmy might know. He's in your raid group. He sees how you're doing things, right? Jimmy might be able to give you the answer.
Yeah, so a lot of people tend to have this perspective that the raiding scene, or like people who raid, are very toxic. Like you might be in a Final Fantasy group or a free company where, you have your gardeners, you have your role players, you have the people that like doing like, the dungeon roulettes every day, and then you have your crafters, and then you have the raider that's like in the chat like screaming, if you don't raid, you're not playing the game, it's not real. And because of that, we hear a lot about raid groups falling apart and Static struggling with different individuals. So like, would you say that all of the concerns people have as far as like the toxicity of the game and being able to criticize those players or have those different players practice on their own, if they're not keeping up with mechanics, like should they be concerned now that 7 people are upset that they just wiped for the 8th time? You know what I mean?
I'm not sure that I understand your question. Are you asking if people should be worried about the one toxic raider?
It's more so people believe raiding is a toxic environment. So, do you agree with that? And if you don't, why? And if you do, why?
Raiding can definitely be a toxic environment. Unfortunately, Party Finder can also be very toxic, which is very unfortunate given that it's kind of how I think most people should take their first step into raiding to even see if it's something for them, which could lead to some bad experiences. But the stigma about Final Fantasy XIV raiding and being toxic, I don't necessarily think so. Coming from World of Warcraft, when my friend and I started playing Final Fantasy XIV, we almost found the game to be creepy.
Yeah?
For how nice the player base was. Whether it be in the raiding scene or in the casual scene, it was very staggering coming from the WoW raiding scene into Final Fantasy XIV. Granted, this was back in Stormblood, and about mid-Stormblood when we were trying to get into the game, which we didn't really get into raiding until Shadowbringers. But I don't think that changes my thought that back then the community was way too nice, in my opinion. But there's always that stigma that they run into one toxic guy in Party Finder and now everybody's toxic. I think that's just something that people are going to have to accept is going to be an outlier in every situation, that there's going to be somebody toxic regardless of what piece of content you're doing. Whether you're doing Eureka and you have somebody trying to farm Gil and you're messing up their Gil farm in Eureka, or you have an Omni crafter that's trying to craft gear day one of the new raid tier, or you have somebody doing maps that's getting upset that, you know, they're not getting any portals, but you are, and now they're going to be toxic towards you. There's a lot of situations where toxicity is going to come, and singling that into just raiding is honestly very, very far from reality. It's planted everywhere. You just hear about the raiding instances of it more.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I feel like with the way 14 is typically structured, at least before the introduction of Criterion Dungeon, right? You have the expectations that 8 players perform kind of this harmonious dance with the boss to keep things afloat a certain way, and now you have that one player that's just really, really not grasping that mechanic, and that is why the group continues to fail or have to redo something. And personally, I've always found it a little strange, because when we talk about the concept of an MMO, right, these are games that have usually drip content in them, where the MMO is meant to kind of stretch your time on the game, because things take a lot more time to complete. But most people in games like Final Fantasy, they want to run the dungeon, hit it under 12 minutes, I need to be done now, my precious time is now. So what would you say to that new player that is like a little bit anxious about getting into raiding because they don't want to let 7 people down, or they believe that they will drag 7 people along for longer periods to actually learn something?
Well, let me counter your question with a question.
Sure.
Those 7 people that you're worried about bringing down, do you not think that they were in your same shoes at one point?
The likelihood is they were, right? Because I don't think skill level translates between games as nicely as people pretend, but maybe it does.
I mean, to a degree it does. Like, I'm an ex-WoW player, I raided in WoW, I have a raiding background, but that doesn't mean I walked into Final Fantasy XIV and instantly was a good raider. The games are a bit fundamentally different. I may have had a good mindset, but I still had to understand the differences of what's going on in the games, right? The fights are structured differently. The ping is very different. The server tick system in Final Fantasy XIV was a lot to get used to. Everybody's started at some point, and if you're worried about starting, then are you ever going to actually start, is what I'd have to say to that.
Okay, so when you talk about like the potential toxic player, you know, like you said, it could just be one person in a group that like kind of gives that 8th person, the new player, a lot of hell, just because it's like, how do you not know this? Or, you know, using your potion here, or using this here, or eating food, these are like basic things that you should understand already. You know, like maybe something was introduced in the game, like fundamentally, like, hey, as a tank, you put on your tank stance, but for some reason that new player went into a raid with the misconception of, oh, I should have my tank stance on all the time, and they're the off tank, right? So they don't understand the whole tank swapping mechanic yet, and they get like a lot of heat for that.
I mean, I think these are just things that you inevitably have to learn, and I think 14 doesn't necessarily do an amazing job at teaching you these things. Though they have upgraded the Hall of the Novice to include more actual raid mechanics. I did it on alt recently, and I was rather surprised that they showed some of the things that they showed, but also a little turned off of the fact that some of the mechanics function a little differently in certain scenarios, and they don't do a really good job at delineating what those differences are. I think a really good example is there is some type of line AoE that actually functions like a wild charge mechanic, which is, to explain, a mechanic where a tank would typically need to be in front and need to use mitigation to take the brunt of the damage, essentially like a tank buster, while the party behind them still takes damage.
Right.
That wasn't... I don't remember the exact context, but there was something similar to that in the new Hall of the Novice that was very confusing. But to your point about pots and food, that isn't really explained anywhere fundamentally within Final Fantasy's game systems. And I'm sure there's probably some great resources to talk about, what you should do as a new raider. And I would kind of just recommend asking.
Right.
If you're unsure, you need to ask. You may get some asshole that wants to give you flack for asking a question. But to be honest, you just gotta ignore those guys. You just gotta... If you feel like you're not getting the answer that you need, you can always go into the Balanced Discord and ask questions. And just, if you're a new player, iterate that you're a new player and you're trying to figure some stuff out, I can guarantee you somebody is going to come and help you.
Okay. So, I do appreciate you talking to us about, the new player experience and how they should kind of, navigate that situation. But going back to you personally, obviously raiding is something I am going to assume that you love, and, why do you love it? What about raiding over all the other forms of, 14 content really, keep you engaged with game? Do you just love 14 and you just touch everything in 14, or is it kind of I play 14 because raiding is that bread and butter?
That is definitely the main reason that I came to 14 and played it. Nowadays, I have a pretty split attention on things related to Final Fantasy. Obviously, I raid, as we've talked about. Housing is a big thing that I enjoy within the game. I love decorating houses. I have a group of casual friends that I sit and chat with pretty regularly. And there are other forms of content. I used to craft every now and then. I haven't too much this expansion. But it's really just, I think I just enjoy being on Final Fantasy XIV. I love the aesthetic of the game. I really enjoy the MSQ of the game. I've even made an alt to replay through the MSQ. And before somebody says it, yes, I know New Game Plus exists. But I won't do it in New Game Plus. I'll just make an alt to do it. But those are kind of the main things. Raiding has been a thing that I've been doing. God, I feel like longer than I can remember almost. At least 15 years. If not maybe a little bit more. I think I just enjoy the challenge. There are times where even I ask myself, why am I still raiding? Because there are times where obviously I need a break, and I almost took a break this raid tier, but had the opportunity to finally go join a raid group rather than lead one with, a good group of friends, and ended up having a good time.
Okay.
But I definitely think it's just challenging myself and working towards improving. Going back to bringing up third-party tools again, right? I'm very... Logs are something that a lot of people aren't very friendly towards. It could almost be a taboo, right? A lot of people may view logs as, people are trying to see if I'm bad or not or whatever. To me, it's more of a tool to gauge my own performance. I don't really care to compete with other people that I know. Like, ooh, my number's higher than yours. I don't really care about that. What I care about is setting myself to a certain level and trying to achieve that, right? And that's kind of a big goal for me and for the raids, is just to kind of have a performance that I want to achieve and feel happy with, while still having fun doing the fights. And obviously some raid tiers are a lot more fun than others. Like I think this current raid tier, the fights have felt really engaging. It was a step up from last raid tier in difficulty. Can't say that I'm the biggest fan of the thematics of the fights this raid tier compared to last, but I have really enjoyed them. M8S is probably a new favorite fight of mine. Thematically, it feels really good to play, really fast, zippy. And yeah, it's probably more long-winded with some tangents there, but yeah, just raid to raid basically.
Okay, and you did mention you love housing design and stuff. So would you say that like every situation, every section of 14 in the various different content that's offered in the game, would you say they all have like a major end game that you have to dedicate the same time and attention to like you would for raiding?
Definitely not. I think a lot of different pieces of content in Final Fantasy are geared towards more casual players. And not that that's a bad thing, because every game needs something to dedicate to casual player bases. I don't think you're going to get the same level of complexity like raiding has, mainly just because there's a lot of things going on, a lot of things you need to figure out. You need to know your rotation, you need to know your raid comp, you need to know how to handle all of these mechanics, especially Final Fantasy, who likes to recycle a lot of mechanics and just change them up ever so slightly. I'm not sure. It's just, I think 14 rating is a lot more complex than the other content that it offers.
Okay. That's fair. I know there's a lot of long-term goals, or you have. I think personally, since I've obviously touched every aspect of the game a little bit, I would tend to agree with you on most things, that raiding tends to be, or at least it appears to be, the most complex content. I think the only thing that I might consider close to it might be the dungeon crawling content. So when you're doing Heavens on High and you're trying to actually complete those things, or the end game of Palace of the Dead, a lot of the mobs start getting very unique in their traits and how you have to handle them. Some you hide, some you avoid at all costs, or you need to debuff something and then have the team jump on top of it. So I feel like that content, complexity-wise, is probably the only thing that gets close or equal to.
I could understand maybe close. I definitely wouldn't say equal to.
Yeah, is that because of the ultimate tier, or do you say even on a Savage level it wouldn't be equal?
It definitely wouldn't be equal even on a Savage level. I think the difficulty in the deep dungeons is more dealing with the mobs themselves. There's not necessarily a long list of mechanics, and obviously you're not fighting these mobs for 10 plus minutes at a time. From my experience as somebody who's done dabbled rather in deep dungeon, I think I have maybe one Palace of the Dead clear with a group, and I've tried to solo Heaven on High quite a number of times, I think getting up to floor 80-ish before inevitably dying. It was kind of just, did RNG play in your favor in certain times? Were we able to handle these mobs accordingly with certain cooldowns? Most mobs are usually only have one or two mechanics that you need to be aware of. But the fact that there is a long list of them, I guess I can understand where you're coming from. But there is some great resources that exist for those as well, that you can use to be prepared for those too.
Okay. Would you say in your average raid tier that there are no aspects of RNG? Does every puzzle that the Square Enix developers put into a fight have a clear or multiple solution, or is there just times where you just have to pray and hope that you get lucky this run, you know?
There's usually a clear-cut solution, maybe even multiple that get developed throughout a raid tier, but there are always going to be instances of maybe a set of debuffs exists within the mechanic, and you may get 4 possibilities of debuffs, which means you may have to do 4 different variations of the mechanic, depending on what debuff you got. So, no to the RNG mechanic, but yes to maybe the RNG of what you need to do in that mechanic.
Okay. And I think you mentioned a while ago that like you did used to raid in WoW, so I assume you've raided in other games too. So considering that, the other games have RNG built into their raid structure, and do you think those are more interesting?
I haven't raided in WoW in a long time, or really any other game in a while. I would definitely say that there's more RNG in WoW the last time I played it, but it seems like they're making their fights a bit more structured, similar kind of to Final Fantasy's fights, but also still inducing that element of this is chaos in their raid fights, whereas Final Fantasy is more of a dance. Everything's very choreographed. Things happen on cue. You may just need to handle them slightly differently.
Okay. Because I know I remember.
WoW can be more. I was just gonna say WoW can be more reactive, but Final Fantasy is more planned.
I see. Okay. Because I remember seeing like some crazy stuff a couple years back in like Lost Ark raids, and I also remember there was a lot of people that once you got to that point of Heaven's Ward to Stormblood, there was a lot of people that weren't quite super happy because they were used to the earlier dungeon structure in 14, and then things got very linear Stormblood forward, right? So I know that there's some friction there of like, oh, well, this is too simplified.
I think that's just always going to be something that people complain about. Even within my friend sphere, a lot of people complain about the homogenization of Final Fantasy XIV jobs. And unfortunately, as somebody who's played WoW, and you mentioned Lost Ark, I guess I kind of wiped that from my memory. I did play that for quite a while. Inevitably, things are going to get pruned, things are going to get simplified as more abilities get added into the game. And as game design changes, things may feel kind of samey. I think that's something that's kind of unavoidable. But 14, in my opinion, does a really good job at maybe the classes might feel similar to play, but aesthetically and thematically, they all feel very different.
I see. Okay. Now, when it comes to, so we've talked a lot about like your personal experience, and we talked a lot about like the new player experience and how you would kind of guide that. Is there anything that you would say to your peers, or like people that are already in it, that already have the experience, people that are on the same level as you, a little bit lower, better than you? Do you think there's any advice that you could offer them other than keep at it?
I feel like I personally, my takeaway from raiding in recent years has been to try to enjoy yourself. I know that I've kind of gravitated more towards playing with friends, more so than trying to search for the more hardcore environment. But it's a never-ending dance of trying to feel like I'm satisfied in a raid group, while also still maintaining that level of being able to play with friends. And some people may not be so focused on that, like I was or have been. But I think as long as you are finding enjoyment out of the game, continuing to do what you're doing, as long as you're enjoying it, is really all that matters.
Okay, and you don't worry about like getting, too heated with friends and stuff? considering how tight the raid environment needs to be?
It really depends. There's definitely been instances where I've been at odds with a friend, or we've even, right before a raid, yelled and screamed at each other. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we've let it affect our performance. Granted, I've been blessed with friends that I can get into those very heated knockdown, drag out arguments and us talk a few hours later and be like, hey man, what's up? Like nothing ever happened. So it really depends. As I've loved to say in this little talk, context is key. But as long as you can come to raid and you can separate a lot of the things that are going on, or maybe even things that are going on in life, you know, as long as you're trying your best, I think that's all that matters.
Okay, that's good. Because I know a lot of people tend to have like different mentalities that they look out for when they're like, okay, these are the type of people I would say shouldn't raid because of the way they think about raiding, or maybe they go into it with a lot of bad experiences, right? So now it's kind of like they have these preconceptions or these notions of, well, I can't do this, or my mentality needs to be this way so that I don't cause trouble for the group, or this is how raids work and I know this because of my lived experience despite not having cleared anything, right? So that's why I always wonder, like, well, what would you tell a peer? Because peers obviously have also gone through these different things and they have their own opinions despite having cleared the content, right?
Right. I definitely think for somebody who hasn't actually gotten into content, the idea of having preconceived notions of what the content is or how people doing the content are, I know it's really hard to remove your own kind of pre-made bias from those notions that you've preconceived, but realistically you shouldn't have them. I think that's setting yourself up for failure. Or maybe failure is a bad term, but you're setting yourself up with this expectation that things are different than they may be. And that having expectations is good, but when you set your expectations too stringently or maybe too high, the downfall from that, if they aren't the same, may kind of sway you from actually enjoying yourself.
Right. And that's the big thing for you, is you want to make sure people are enjoying what they're doing and they're not just mindlessly raiding because they're good at it and they were asked to do it, or they feel obligated to do it. Because I have met quite a few people that are very, very good at raiding, like best in their group, but they just feel this weird obligation, and they always say they're going to quit every tier, but they don't, you know?
I mean, I think that obligation exists especially in long-established raid groups. It's very easy to feel like you want to quit, but then there's that voice that might be in the back of your head that's saying, oh, well, if I quit, then I'm leaving my friends. I think there's a bit more layers there than just feeling obligated. As somebody who's kind of felt that way before in my old raid leading role, it kind of felt like if I wasn't keeping it together, then my group was going to fall apart, which inevitably it did. I think that's just something you're kind of going to have to either accept, or if you don't want to accept it, then you just kind of unfortunately stay where you're at.
Okay, that's fair. So, I don't have any more questions for you, but is there something that I didn't touch on that you'd like to share? Or maybe a personal experience you're thinking about?
I don't think I necessarily have any personal experiences that are all that interesting. I feel like we kind of touched on most things. I mean, I feel like I just want to reiterate, if you really want to get into Final Fantasy rating, or rating in general, not just Final Fantasy, just jumping in and trying it. There's always things advertised like learning parties or prog parties. And there's always going to be somebody toxic in some of those environments. And understanding that those things exist, or those people exist, you just kind of need to ignore them. Find some resources on what you're trying to do and just go do it.
Just do it the good old Shia LaBeouf, huh?
Well, yeah, pretty much. Are you gonna go do it? I mean, you can say all day that you want to do something. Until you actually do it, you're gonna have somebody staring at you like, why do you keep talking about this and never do anything? Right. I hear that so often in raiding. I want to get into raiding. I want to do this. I want to do that. I've offered to even go and do extremes with some friends, just to kind of. That way they have somebody to go in with. They're not there by themselves, and they never do.
Right. If I had to try to guess or assume myself as the public mass and how people might think of it, I think most people tend to think about this is something they want to do, but the time commitment scares them, right? I think time commitment scares everybody in almost everything they do. Like, oh, I want to work out, or I want to watch that new show, but it's 40 hours or something like that. So they just kind of don't. And then there's also I know for a lot of casual players, there was the disappointment aspect, where because 14 is such a team-based experience, most PvE games, when a partner dies, it's very easy for the other person to go pick them back up. They have 30 seconds to survive or something like that. Whereas when you die in 14, you die. Yes, your healer has mana to use on you, but you have a vuln stack now, and you're kind of a little bit of a detriment to the team for some time. And maybe that also gets in people's head,
Well, I'm not sure a vuln stack is necessarily what they get, but I understand your point. Kind of just feeling like you're maybe letting people down, but how are you going to learn?
Well, that is true. There's only one way to learn. Which, I think the Criterion dungeons are good for that now. There's a smaller pool of people,
Yeah, it's a smaller pool for sure. You're definitely not able to res as easily as in most Final Fantasy XIV content, which some would say is a blessing, some would say is a curse. I personally think reses are really good in a prog environment, but after a certain point, if you're continually needing to abuse infinite reses, well, there might be some other issues that need to be addressed.
Fair enough. So, I'll ask one more thing, because I did just have a question come to mind. And this is, my personal experience coming into a play a little bit, but it's a question I like asking. I tend to ask everybody that's doing harder content or casual content just to get an idea of the baseline thought. But if I'm a person trying to get into raiding, and I have a weakness, which weakness is worse to have? Mechanical knowledge or not having mechanical knowledge, or me not having rotation or rotational knowledge? So if I'm perfect at my rotation, if I struggle with mechanics, is that more detrimental to me being perfect at mechanics but having bad rotation?
I feel like that's a very loaded question. Ultimately, the goal is to execute mechanics while doing a rotation. So, having to pick one or the other, I'd probably want to take the player that knows the mechanics.
Really? Even if they can't push out the numbers?
Well, if you don't know the mechanics and you're dead, are you doing damage?
Good point. Some people are quick on their feet, but then they've completely missed the DPS window as a result of not knowing what to do immediately, right?
Well, I'd assume that the player that knows the mechanics will inevitably get to the point where they can do some type of rotation. So, I mean, I think that's the biggest hurdle to pass in 14 is to execute mechanics while doing your rotation. Doing them in a vacuum is one thing. Doing them while in a fight is another.
Right. Okay. Well, anyway, is there anything you'd like to say to the lovely people at home?
I think I covered everything. You know, just like I said, get out there and do it.
Okay. You heard it here, folks. Get out there and do it. And like, subscribe, and all that jazz. There's another one. There's like the bell or something like that.